All right, tonight I'm going to be talking about climbing, and kind of like the presentation before about surfing, I'm going to be using the history of climbing to teach you a little bit about how the gear works and how the gears influence the history and vice versa. But I'm not really going to go into how to rock climb so much. Just like surfing, it's kind of better to just do it. And I'm definitely open to teach anybody if they're interested in learning. So I guess we'll start off with a question. How many of you guys... They're all stoked about climbing too. How many of you guys have rock climbed before? Yeah. How many of you guys have rock climbed outside before? Yeah. Actually, that's a pretty good number. I'm surprised. So yeah, nowadays a lot of people climb inside, but outdoor rock climbing is kind of lost as much of a following. So today I'm going to hopefully talk about how that culture has changed over the years. So yeah.
Hold on, is someone playing the live stream?
Yeah.
Where's that coming from? Hilarious. Is it the echo? Echo.
Why?
Speakers?
Oh.
Which of these like 40 things controls the volume?
Oops. Hold on.
Wait, echo.
Alright, got it.
You got it? Okay.
Unless you hear it, okay, got it in 10 seconds.
Alright. Okay.
Cool. Alright, I'll get started. Alright, so before we start, I'm going to go over some just basic things so that we kind of have some context of what's going on when I'm talking about climbing. The basic idea when you go rock climbing is that there is, you're attached to a rope, and then you have a partner that's going to catch you if you fall. So the anchor, this is top roping. This is what a lot of people do in the gym. The anchor's above you. So if you fall, the belayer catches you, and you're not really going to fall anywhere. Lead climbing is usually what's done outside, and that's when you put kind of like mini anchors as you're climbing. They're pieces of gear that go into the rock. So if you fall from here, you actually are going to fall a little ways because the rope is above the last piece of gear, but you're going to fall down to here and then you're going to be cut. So you're still going to be fine. You're going to take a little fall, but you will survive. Then if there's multi-pitch climbing, you climb up. Imagine if you're trying to do a 1,000-foot rock climb in Yosemite, the rope is only 210 feet long, so you have to do multiple rope lengths. So you go up one rope length, you set up an anchor, and then the person that you're climbing with comes up behind you. And this is similar to top roping, and the rope is above you, so you really can't fall at all. You can fall like a foot max. And then to get back down from climbing, we do rappelling. So you have the rope in the anchor, and then you are attached to the harness. The rope is attached to the harness, and you can just lower yourself down off the rock. Okay, so the beginnings. Rock climbing started with mountaineering, actually. It was kind of an evolution of mountaineering as people started trying harder mountains that were more steep vertical rock faces that people needed to do. So they started rock climbing. And at the beginning, there was like no real rock climbing gear. These guys just in like hiking boots. They basically just went and took telephone wire, or they just took rope from like a hardware store and they just tied it around their waist. So these guys are total badasses. Essentially free soloing, like you could take falls with a rope tied around your waist, but like it wouldn't be that fun. And a lot of this stuff started in Europe, so in the States we're kind of lagging behind. Nobody's really doing it here. So you can see this guy here is like just wearing like sandals, or it's just like sandals basically. Now look at this guy. So they didn't have harnesses, so to rappel, to create the friction needed to rappel down, just wrap it around your body. So that guy's like he's like a cowboy. That guy's, and he's wearing like, whatever kind of boots that is. So these guys, they're just total insane people. But, and the hardest grade at the time was a 5'9". So if anybody's been in the gym, they know 5'9" is not necessarily that hard these days, but at the time that was some cutting edge shit. So for those of you that don't know how climbing ratings work, here's a simple graph to kind of guide you into it. Just kidding. It's actually a little bit easier than that. This is like the international rating, so it's all sorts of, it gets complicated very quickly. But in the States, we just deal with the 5.0 scale. So I couldn't find this graphic in English, unfortunately. But
that means really hard, really, really hard.
Yeah. Basically, what a lot of people don't know about the 5-point scale. So basically, all rock climbs here in the States are 5.0 to 5.15C is the hardest currently. And the reason why it's 5 point a number is because like first grade climbing is just hiking basically. Second grade is like steeper hiking. Third grade is like a little bit of scrambling. Fourth grade is like even more scrambling, like you might even want a rope. And then fifth grade is like vertical rock faces, so that's like what we would actually call rock climbing. And then from there it's just 5-point, whatever difficulty it would be. So yeah, usually as a beginner you could start on like 5.5s, and then yeah, 5.15c is total absurd, like overhanging on tiny holds. So yeah, at the beginning, the way climbing worked was people did aid climbing, and that the ethic of aid climbing is just get up the wall. Like there's no real ethic other than just getting up the thing. And the way people were getting up the wall is by using this newfangled, quote-unquote, specialized gear that people were developing for rock climbing. So people were basically, initially they were using rail ties, and they were just nailing them into cracks and tying ropes to them, and that was like what they were using to anchor themselves into the wall. And that kind of transitioned into these pitons, is what we call them. And so these these are pitons. You basically take this thing, and you have a hammer as you're climbing, and you nail it into the rock. You clip a carabiner to this eye in it, and then you clip your rope to the carabiner. So that's what they were used to protect themselves. And at this time, grades were getting pushed a little bit, like it got up to like 5 pens. And in this time period, like pitons, carabiners, all of the basics of rock climbing were developed, all the basic tools. And I can actually, so pitons are not really used anymore, and I'll talk about why later, so I can't show you any of those, but we still do use stoppers. So these things here, that is what you're trusting your life onto. And we still do use these. Initially this is all they use, now we have other gear, but we still do use these when we have to. Basically you take this little piece of metal, and you call that a nut, and you slide it into a crack. It's kind of hard to demonstrate because we don't have any cracks here. But you can imagine there's a little crack in the rock. You slide it in, and this is a little bit tapered, if you can see. And so you kind of slide it in, and you kind of want it to just like wedge into the crack. And then you clip your carabiner onto it, and then you clip your rope into it. So if you take a fall, that is what's holding you from not hitting the ground. So it's a little bit scary before you start placing them. You're like, that's insane. But they're actually really, really reliable. And like these things can take multiple falls, and it's fine. And I've fallen into these things before, and it's totally fine. As long as you know how to place them properly, this will save your life. So, yeah. Another thing that was developed in the time is climbing chalk, and this is basically just, it actually came from gymnastics chalk, but basically just keeps your hands dry so that you have better friction on the rock. And harnesses. So instead of having to tie the rope around your waist, which is really uncomfortable and terrible if you fall, you have this nice, comfortable, you put your legs through them, they kind of go around your waist, and then these are all rated for like multiple kilonewtons, so you can hang a car on this thing and it won't break. So you just tie your rope into this, and when you fall, you're just hanging comfortably in this thing instead of it being tied around your waist. So yeah. Here's a good graphic of how that works. So you kind of slide that into the crack, and as you can see, there's a little bit of taper. Most natural cracks aren't perfectly vertical, so you can find these little tapered spots. And if you fall, that should just get wedged in there, and it won't fall out, hopefully. And those are pitons. The crappy thing about pitons, and this is why they're not really used anymore, is because they're hard to take out of the rock, and also if you do take them out of the rock, they leave permanent scars in the cracks. Because if you can imagine, you're basically nailing this thing in, and when you take it out, you have a little gap where it used to be. So because of that, there's actually a lot of them still in the wall, and if you like climb in Yosemite or any of the other historic areas, you still use these. So you'll be climbing, you'll see a rusty old piton, you just clip into that thing, hope it's okay. Usually they're pretty alright, so yeah. So what is aid climbing? Aid climbing is, and this is what they were doing historically, is instead of, basically you're just trying to get up the wall any way possible, so instead of like, you see how this guy, he's not really actually rock climbing, like his arms and his legs are not touching the rock, he's not getting up the wall just by his like physical prowess. He's actually hanging on his gear, so there's like pieces of gear in this crack, and then he's got this sling that he's stepping up on. So this is historically how people got up these really steep, crazy walls. People weren't really, they didn't have the like techniques or the gear to climb these things just off their own physical prowess. So they were pulling on gear to get up these crazy walls. And this meant you had to follow a crack system, so you couldn't just follow just go up a rock face. You had to make sure you were following a crack. And so there's a lot of really interesting ascents that were done. One of the biggest ascents of like the 80 climbing days was Warren Harding, and he spent 28 days on the wall going up the Don Wall in Yosemite. And actually, in about 20 days in, there was this absurd storm that hit Yosemite, and a bunch of the park rangers were worried that they were going to get bad press if 2 climbers died on the wall. So they basically sent a helicopter up to rescue them, and this guy and his partner basically flicked them off and was like, "We don't." They wrote something in a can and threw it to the bottom, and they wrote, "Rescue is unwarranted, unasked for, and will not be accepted." And so, I don't know if we have time, but this is actually probably worth seeing. This is, so these guys, imagine, they're just 28 days on the wall. They had no contact with the outside world. This was like 1970. They were just 2 climbers. Climbing had no popular recognition at this point. They had no idea. When they got to the top, for some reason, this had gone mainstream. And so there was a crowd of people there to meet them. And so this is kind of like...
The ascent had been of solid granite. A rock climb, the wall of morning light of El Capitan. Not really a mountain at all, but a sheer cliff in Yosemite National Park. For nearly a month, the 2 climbers had inched their way up, and finally they were there. They had conquered the previously unconquered. Warren Harding and Dean Caldwell had made it to the top. It's 3,600 feet from the base. A welcoming party of girlfriends, friends, and newsmen were already atop El Capitan. They'd taken the easy way, a hike up the backside of the peak. To climbers, Harding is something of a legendary hero. He has ascended every mountain in Yosemite National Park. The trip was not without its bad points. The 2 climbers talked with newsmen.
Was there a misunderstanding between you and the National Park Service regarding the rescue?
Yes, there was. Dave apparently, through the circumstances, thought that a rescue was necessary. However, we were in very fine shape, in no condition to need a rescue or even contemplate one.
Damn. All right, well, yeah, we can just skip it. It's fine. The funny line is about to come up. I promise. I can just... Basically, the other guy, this guy, Warren Harding, which is the total alcoholic and kind of a nutcase in general, they ask, "Why the heck would you climb this thing?" And he's like, "Because we're insane!" There's no other reason for it. Like, that's literally his quotes. So, how do I go to the next slide now?
Great question.
Okay.
Press start slide 2.
So...
No.
All right, so yeah, that was the historic. Then free climbing came around. Free climbing is basically, instead of using these artificial means to get up the wall, you're still using gear to protect yourself from falling, but you're only actually using your own hands and feet to move yourself up the wall, if that makes sense. So if you can see this person here, she's not hanging on the gear, she has her hands on the crack, she's moving herself up the wall, using her hands and her feet, but she is still using gear to save herself from falling and dying. And so the reason why this kind of came around is because somebody invented something called the cam, or they were originally called friends, but now they're called cams, and that is this device here. And this, instead of being a passive placement like the nut is, where there's no moving parts, this does have moving parts. And this is really nice because basically you stick this in a crack, and then it expands out, and then it fits right into the crack. So if you can, actually, I found it earlier. This is not a great demonstration, but maybe it gives a little bit of the idea. If this was the crack that you're climbing, you can stick it in, and it just stays in there. And the more force that's pulled outwards here, the more force that is pushed outwards by the lobes. So the more friction power you have, basically. So essentially, the harder fall you take, the better it's going to grab. So these almost never fall. These are extremely reliable. They're also very easy to place and take out. So these are kind of like the modern standard for gear. So I can actually pass these around because they're kind of fun to play with.
Did you initially call them friends?
Yeah, they were initially called Friends. And they're still called Friends in Europe, actually. And this is also the time period when specialized rock climbing shoes came about. They're kind of weird looking, but basically they have this like sticky, firm rubber on the bottom. So you have really fine control. These hug your feet really well. You have really fine control over where you want to place your feet, and you can put a lot of pressure on really small holds, and it'll kind of hold you up. And this is quite sticky. It's patented rubber, actually. I won't pass these around because they're a little bit stinky. But you can imagine. So yeah, this is the original cam back in the day, just like. And yeah, so I don't really want to. It was kind of a pain to watch the videos, but basically, you can kind of see from that video we already saw, at that time period, rock climbing was a total fringe sport. It was like really counterculture. The rangers in Yosemite had huge problems with these guys. They were basically living in Camp 4, which is a campsite in Yosemite, doing a lot of drugs, drinking a lot of booze, and just like doing whatever the hell they want. This guy especially was famous for like tripping acid and then climbing 3,000-foot rock climbs. So yeah, they were total like it was a very different culture then. So this is something. So I mentioned free climbing, and a lot of people get confused now. What is the difference between free climbing and free soloing? Because free soloing is climbing with no rope or protection, and this is what people hear about in the media because it's instantly understandable as like that's really insane and really cool. Like, these people are superhuman. But in the climbing community, this is very, very rare. Like, less than 1% of climbers ever try free soloing. Because there's no room for error. If this guy falls, like, this is Alex Honnold. He's the best free soloer in the world right now. If he falls right now, you can imagine, like, there's no chance. So, yeah. So now you know. Free soloing is not free climbing. So if somebody says they free climb, they're not crazy. It's free soloing that is the crazy. And then the 1980s rolled around, and sport climbing kind of became the big new thing. And this was because a lot of the like old. So when you're free climbing, if you can imagine, you're trying to place all that gear as you're climbing. So you have to follow crack systems. That's the only way you can safely climb up the wall, because you have to have places to put that gear. Then they came out. Then people started drilling permanent holes in the rock, and that kind of created. So basically, this is a bolt, and you just take a power drill, just drill a hole in the rock face, and then screw this thing in, and that thing is extremely solid. That's never going to come out of the rock. So basically, it turned climbing into something that normal people could do safely. And it meant you didn't have to follow crack systems. So suddenly these like previously unclimbable faces, like rock faces, could be climbed. And it kind of brought like mainstream attention to the sport. And it also brought around climbing competitions, because one thing that happens with sport climbing is now that you can climb these absurd flat, just like blank faces, is it became much more of an athletic thing where you have to like be extremely in shape. Basically, a lot of rock climbing competitions came about, and through competition, you gain media attention and you gain sponsorship, and then people could start actually making a living climbing. So it wasn't like a dirtbag activity anymore. It was something that you could like semi-legitimately do. You're not going to make a lot of money, but you're going to make enough money to survive. So, and the grades started getting pushed a lot. So now the hardest grade at this time was 514. And they had pretty sweet outfits in the 80s. This was like, that was super standard at the time. Another thing that I wasn't going to touch on, but it is a big part of climbing now, is bouldering. This has kind of had a separate growth, which is why I didn't want to touch on it initially. But basically, bouldering is climbing short routes, but that are usually extremely difficult. and you're using no protection other than a pad underneath you. So basically, you're going to fall into this pad. But you don't have a harness or a rope or anything attached to it. And this started in the 60s with a guy named John Gill. And at first, people thought this guy was kind of insane because he was in Yosemite with these 3,000-foot walls, and he was bouldering at the bottom of them. And the initial reaction of the climbing community to bouldering was like, why would you do that? Makes no sense. When there are these huge walls, why would you be climbing the boulder at the base of that big wall? And it kind of started out as a way to stay in shape. So people, like on their off days when they weren't climbing in the big walls, would go bouldering just to stay in physical shape. But in recent years, it's gained like really, really widespread appeal. So, and then rock climbing gyms started showing up, and this was kind of an outgrowth of the climbing competition community because it's really hard to do outdoor competitions that people are going to watch. Like, it's hard, and you can't change the wall, so it's going to be the same every year. But if you build a false wall, you can be changing it, and you can have really interesting movements. And yeah, so that's why the original rock gyms were started, were just to basically host competitions. And the first rock gym was actually created in the United States in 1987. And these have exploded. They're huge now. Now there are over 388 gyms in the US, and 40 were built in just the last year. And that number's just going up. So this is kind of where like the next level of climbing is going. Well, this is kind of where climbing is going. This is kind of a cool, we'll just play like a short amount of it if we can. Just to show kind of like why climbing is cool. It's absurd, yeah. Alright, you get the basic idea. The cool part about, and you see, like, it's so appealing to watch because they can set these moves that are absurd, that you would never find on real rock, and they can make these athletes just, like, do insane things. So, that's kind of what it's become now. Let's see.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. Damn you. Can I start it from this slide?
No.
Okay, so yeah, now it's kind of become less of a fringe activity. It's kind of widely accepted as a normal sport. And since kids can start climbing in the gym at a really young age, people are getting really strong, and it's really pushing the sport forward difficulty-wise. Some really insane things are getting done. So modern sport climbing, these are the two best sport climbers in the world. They're really different people. This is Chris Sharma. He's from Southern California. He's kind of got like a hippie vibe to him. He's been like the king of sport climbing since the 90s. And then this is Adam Ondra. This is the new, like, the best sport climber in the world. And he's kind of like, looks like an alien. And he's freakishly strong at rock climbing, but he's not like kind of a big guy, as you can see. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. And the hardest sport climb currently is 515C, and that is La Dura Dura in Spain. And this is actually kind of a funny video. I'll show
This is
this.
them together.
This is them trying the hardest project in the world together. This was done like 3 years ago.
They don't act like it's competitive, but come on, son. Two people, one route, both challenged to hell. Who's gonna get further? In a way, this is like the epitome of a rock climbing competition.
You see Chris, and you're like, yeah, that guy's the best sport climber in the world. He looks the part. He's got muscles, his forearms, his shoulders, his biceps. He's a strong-looking dude.
And then you got Adam, who's like totally different. At first glance, you don't really think he's gonna be so strong. And then he just takes off like this rocket, and he goes fast, man. There's like this demonic focus that comes over the guy, and you can hear him growling.
It's really intense to watch. He gets going like, you're like, what is that?
He climbs with this fierce aggression towards it, and it's emotional. If he falls, you hear it.
He just fucking loses his mind.
This eardrum breaking shriek.
Alright. We can just keep it on the screen actually, because I'm about to show another video. So that's sport climbing, and you can see it's like kind of insane to watch. They're holding on like these tiny holds, and you're just like, how? It's insane. But so then there's trad climbing. That's kind of when you're following the cracks more and using this traditional gear to stay in the wall. And kind of the best guy now is Tommy Caldwell, and you might have heard his name because he recently did the first free ascent of the Don Wall. So that guy that we looked at earlier, the alcoholic dude, he sent the first aid ascent of the Don Wall in the 1970s. But Tommy Caldwell recently did a free ascent, so he actually just climbed the whole thing with his hands and feet. And that's 2,500 feet of continuous 513 and 514 climbing. It's an absurd feat of rock climbing. He spent 7 years of his life living on the wall, like literally camping 1,000 feet off the ground, working specific pitches on this climb to be able to do it, and that's the best free climber in the world doing that. So it's something that nobody thinks is going to be done like anytime soon again. So pretty impressive stuff. Yeah, and there's some other guys pushing the grades as well on some shorter climbs, but that's definitely the most impressive. This is kind of fun. So now you can see the difference between trad and sport climbing, since it's still really hard, but they're following a crack, so it's kind of a
the
different
guys have had really
technique.
bad weather on their trip over to
So he has
Canada,
to, like,
but they
keep his
did manage to do
fingers
the
in
route.
his crack to get his way up the wall. Yeah.
Come on. Good.
Yeah, it does happen.
Come on.
Cut it off.
Come on.
What?
No, thank you.
Come on.
Come on. Come on.
Piedrahita climbed it first. He was struggling with the mono.
See, so it is.
Do it again.
I can do it. Yeah.
Well, you just press start.
No, because there's about to be another video.
Oh.
And then modern bouldering. So this is the people pushing. The current hardest grade is V16. The people that are kind of pushing the grades here are two American guys, Daniel Woods and Jimmy Webb, and then a guy from Norway, Nale. And they're currently kind of battling it out for who's the best, but they're all just really, really strong, basically. And we can kind of see what bouldering looks like at the top level. Let's see.
Couldn't run for the facts, you gotta make it. Suffer cause you love it, ain't it? Ask for fame now. Never let them hold back your flame. Better than that, the devil can't change you. On the same level with the disciples of kings. Value was never measured by the price of your change. Your life is worth more than that. Your body is built to get the rain, storm, and fat. We are never meant for any harm, relax. See the stars in heaven, you were born for that. All the angels blowing horns with you back from the dead. In the middle of a war, you trapped in your head.
Nice, Daniel. Come on.
The force behind the divorce of all nature, running its course is a source of all anger. Got a habit of ignoring the stranger. No matter how you have it, we are all in danger. Some will laugh at you, some will call the changer. Some will blast at you, you're trying to save blood. Walking these killing fields.
So you can see it's like extremely physically powerful, and you're just doing like 4 or 5 moves. It's like a really short climb, but they spend months just working those 4 or 5 moves to be able to do it when they're at this level. Because you saw those holds are like just half of a finger pad big, and you're holding your entire body weight on them. So it's really easy to fall. So they just try it over and over again until they can do it. Then let's see. So that's a little bit of the history. And now if you want to be cool and go to a rock climbing gym and sound like what you're talking about, we'll go over some climbing lingo because it is a little bit crazy at first. If you go to the gym, you're going to be like, are they speaking English? I really can't tell. So beta, information about a route.
I think we're pretty low on time.
Okay, wait. This is the last. Wait, actually. All right. Yeah, we can skip through most of this. I guess, yeah, we just skip the whole thing. But this makes more sense if we went through the lingo first. But can really be really easily misinterpreted, so be careful with your words. So, can I put my nuts on your rack? Your rack is like your full set of gear when you go trad climbing. So, and the nuts are these little pieces of metal that I was passing around. So that seems like it could be okay, but probably shouldn't say that. Let's get pumped on your woody. Yeah, I probably shouldn't say that. That basically means let's do a workout on a woody is a home climbing wall. If somebody says, pump that jizzler, don't choke the cobra. What they're trying to say is that use that small crimp and don't grab onto the quick draw. And then check out that skin monkey doing the French blow. I honestly don't even know what that is. So yeah. Okay, so if you want to get into climbing gyms are a really easy way to do that. So I think it's like $15 per day usually. You can get basic techniques and see if you even like the sport before you invest a lot of time and money into it. Also, the climbing culture is extremely encouraging, so don't not go because you think you're not going to be good, because you're probably not going to be good. But everybody was there once, and if you go to a gym, everybody's super encouraging. So basically, if you want to start going outside, which I highly recommend, these are the things you need. So it's a $400 initial investment, which sounds like a lot, but then you can go as many times as you want, basically free of cost after that. So it's not terrible, but yeah. I think that's it.
How are the ratings systems decided? Like, is there an official world body that says like this rock base is this rating?
No. Basically, the strongest climbers in the world, there's only like 2 or 3 people that are doing those grades, so they decide, it's subjective. They decide if this is like harder than that last hardest thing they tried, and they're like, okay, this I guess is pushing the grade. But there's a lot of like debate usually when somebody grades a new route is like the hardest in the world. All the hardest climbers go and try it, and then they say, okay, that actually is the hardest, or maybe that should be downgraded.
And there's on the previous slide, you had like explaining why they're all 5 point. There was another one that said 6. What's a 6?
Yeah, so that is A climbing, which is when, like what I talked about, where you're pulling on gear to get up a wall.
Okay.
So that can be harder than like is physically human possible because you're not having to hold on to the rock. You can actually pull on gear. So yeah. All right.
Cool. Thank you.